Hello, my name is Jennifer Shlomovich, and I am a vegan confidence coach. I specialize in helping vegans eliminate people-pleasing so they can confidently be themselves and navigate the challenges of having a lifestyle different from the people around them. Here on my channel, The Confident Vegan, I share a variety of supportive resources, including inspiring interviews and recipe videos. Today, my special guest is Kimberly Winters, who is a vegan hospitality consultant, creator and host of the international podcast, Did You Bring the Hummus? She's also a public speaker, blogger, and works with restaurants and hotels to provide guidance on enhancing their programming for vegan guests. Driven by an intense desire to make the world a better place, Kimberly is passionate about working with restaurants and hotels in New Jersey to help hospitality businesses benefit from better service to the vegan community. Kimberly also dreams of one day owning her own small vegan bed and breakfast. Kimberly has also served as an expert panel member for USA Today's 10 Best Readers choice for various vegan categories and has been featured on a number of podcasts and shows about veganism, podcasting, and her spiritual side. She is currently president of her local Toastmasters club, serving as a leader and mentor while continuing to build her own speaking skills. You can listen to Kimberly on her podcast, Did You Bring the Hummus?, where she interviews incredible vegans, many in the hospitality industry, with the mission to inspire listeners to go vegan through powerful stories and meaningful conversation. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thanks for having me, Jen.
Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to talk. I have listened to your podcast a couple times and have really enjoyed it, and it's been great connecting with you recently. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. I feel like we're both on that similar mission of sharing with people all the different ways people become vegan and just provide that support for those wherever they are on their journey. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the first question I ask everyone is, what is your vegan story? So what is your vegan story?
I realize now looking back that my vegan story started like when I was a kid. I have all of these moments I can look back on and say and see how like a seed was planted where I was destined to wind up vegan. And I know that for sure. This is my life path, my life calling, purpose, all of those good things. But I hated vegetables and I didn't know how to cook. So when I finally had that moment, and that moment came in 2001 when I had come home, I was still living with my parents. I'd come home from a very gourmet meal of Burger King and I checked the mail. And in the mail for me was an issue of PETA's Animal Times magazine.
Oh.
It was addressed to me. I have no idea to this day how it got there, why it had my name on it, but the universe was like, she's ready for this, I guess, because it showed up. I read it cover to cover that night, and I was up all night, physically sick, thinking about what I had just had for dinner that night, who I had just had for dinner that night, and who I had eaten every other meal before that for pretty much my whole life. It was very rare that, because there weren't any vegetarians or vegans in my world at that point, it's very rare to have a meal that didn't at least have cheese on it. So there was always some kind of animal product, and it really hurt me to make that connection. And the story that really did it was the story of a downed cow. And so for your viewers who might not know, a downed cow is a cow that's been transported and is unable to, walk down the slaughter line. So they are typically pulled out of the trucks and handled very, very violently. And they meet a terrible end no matter what, whether they were walking down the slaughterhouse line or not. But they've been suffering even more because now they can't even walk. But despite that, I didn't go vegan. I went vegetarian first. And I was vegetarian for a long time. I would have spurts where I would stop eating cheese, but they would last for like a year or two. And then for some reason, I would start eating cheese again. But when I first went vegetarian, I actually, since I was living at home with my parents, I had a lot of disposable income. So I was able to give away my leather shoes, handbags, belts, all of those things to people who were still okay with wearing them and then just replace them with vegan versions. So I was already looking at the products that I use, and I had stopped using products that had been tested on animals back in high school when I
Hmm.
first discovered this idea of like animals being tested on for my shampoo. That's ridiculous. I'm not going
Yeah.
to be part of that. But even back then, I was so adamant about it. And I would tell my friends, don't buy this one instead because it's not tested on animals. But I didn't make the connection to what I was eating. It took until I got that magazine for me to actually make that connection. And I knew, even being vegetarian then, that vegan was the goal. I knew I was going to get there. But like I mentioned before, I hated vegetables. Nobody believed that this was going to stick. They were like, that's great, but we'll see. There's no way Kimberly's doing this. So, so for a while, I lived on a lot of pasta and cheese because I was still eating that. Uh, and I read a lot of books and I learned how to make food that was somewhat edible. And I kind of made my way over the course of those years. And like I said, I went, vegan for a bit. And I don't even want to, I hate saying that, like, because I feel like there's going to be people that are like, oh, you don't go vegan and then start eating cheese again. That doesn't happen. Like you're either vegan or you're not. And I agree with that in that I was not vegan, I guess. But I just get so caught up on this. Anyway, just move on from it. But so I finally in 2015 was like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm ready. What are you doing? It really came down to this. What, why are you still doing this? And I just stopped eating cheese. That was the one thing holding me back. And I've been vegan ever since.
I love your story because, first of all, to touching about on the talking about the vegetable piece, where you're the first person who I think I've spoken to on my channel who didn't, really had a disdain for vegetables. And so that's like a whole different challenge
Yeah.
that I feel like, maybe later you can share some tips that I think that could be really valuable for someone who wants to eat more compassionately, but they don't like vegetables, because that's a
Mhm.
totally unique challenge in itself. So maybe we can talk more about that later. But
Yeah.
um, I feel like every vegan usually, there's only been a couple I've spoken to who just went vegan like that.
Mm.
Everyone went through some transition. Some took longer than others. Everyone usually starts being vegetarian. Um, it's so interesting. It was like the universe was signed you up on PETA's mailing list.
Yeah.
It seems like, and it was destined to be.
Yep.
And then and look at all the things that it created. It led to you creating your podcast, which I'm going to ask you about in a moment because I'm curious how that all came about. But I can relate in the whole transition piece because for me, it took some time to transition to that because for me, it started with dairy and how that was making me feel. And then
Mm.
it was like an experiment of like giving it up for 30 days and realizing I felt better in ways I didn't realize I was even feeling bad until I was
Mm.
giving that up. And then I watched the documentary Vegucated. I don't know if you've seen that one
Yeah, it's a good
where,
one.
yeah, it was really, really good. I watched it on Netflix one night and this is a common discussion that comes up with my other guests where we all have that, what do they call it, cognitive dissonance, where
Mm.
there's this disconnect. Like we know where meat comes from, but we don't really make that connection because when we go to the grocery store, it's already neatly packaged. We don't have to see how it got there.
Mm.
Even though we know it still happens in a way where we're disconnected from that. And when I watched Vegucated and they showed all aspects of veganism and they showed some stuff with the slaughterhouses, I couldn't even look at that.
Mm.
It really, more and more, there was this part of me that just wanted to become vegan, but being married and having a blended family, I knew no one in my household was going to be joining me on this quest. And so I had to figure out how to make it work. In the meantime, I just started experimenting. I got a cookbook and I started looking at Pinterest and focusing on meat and then eating meat more so in like social settings or like certain evenings. And then eventually I just couldn't even do that. And then, like you, I went vegan for a few months and then I slid back because I was trying to balance everything, and I went to see a doctor about something with my eyes, and he was telling me to incorporate fish, and so I had
Mm.
gone back to having fish. And then like baked goods. I didn't like eggs anyway. I was not a scrambled egg person or a hard boiled egg person. So I never ate those anyway. But I had products with eggs. So then I like went back to, all right, I'll have baked goods with eggs and I'll have fish.
Mhm.
So it was like vegan for 2, 3 months, slid back. And then finally I just hit this. I just started having an aversion to the fish. And then finally I was just ready to just stop. And so I think that's, common. Everyone, there's no one size fits all. That's why I approach to it. And that's why I love having different people share their journeys because
Mhm.
wherever it's about progress and not perfection. And it takes time to undo our conditioning that we went through, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention our taste buds. Everyone's addicted to cheese. I feel
Mhm.
like that's the hardest thing for everyone to give up. And what I discovered was my taste buds changed after a couple weeks. And so that's something I always tell everyone is give your taste buds a chance to uh, change and adjust. But I love hearing your story. I feel like it has some unique components on that can be helpful for our listeners. If you're somebody who doesn't like vegetables or someone who's gone back and forth between vegetarian and vegan, not to beat yourself up because a lot of us kind of went through that vegetarian vegan cha-cha for a little bit before
Yeah.
before before we but once you're in, and then it's like it's people ask me all the time, a lot of non-vegans in my life, don't you miss it, don't you want to just go back? No. Isn't it
Mm-mm.
hard? Yeah, you
Mm-mm.
have your challenges, but I feel like when you're connected to your why and why it's important to you, nothing's going to derail that for you.
Right.
So
Yep.
so I would love to hear more about your podcast. Did you bring the hummus? I love the title.
Right.
How did that all come about?
I love telling this story because it's one of those moments in life where you make a decision, you're like, man, I'm going to do that. And you have no idea where it's going to take you. And then it takes you somewhere super cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, you mentioned in my bio that I am a Toastmasters member. And this was 2020. We were in the middle of all the stuff with the pandemic, and lots of people were starting podcasts, but this gal here was not interested. So I wasn't even thinking about a podcast. I'd never listened to a podcast. And then I was looking through my next options for projects within Toastmasters in my, they call it a pathway. So in my pathway, I had a bunch of electives that I could do, and I had to complete one of them in order to move forward in my path.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were super boring things as far as I'm concerned. Things like social media, and like I have such a love-hate relationship with social media. So it's like I'm not going to do this. I don't want to do that. So it kind of settled on, okay, well, here's this podcast thing. Like I said, I'm not really interested in this, but it seems to be the most interesting of these. So let's do that. So then I get to reading the requirements of this project, and I need to record 60 minutes of content. I need to put it out into the world for strangers to hear. And then I need to do a 2 to 3 minute speech leading into a segment that I'm going to share with my club. So I got to thinking, if I have to do 60 minutes of content, I better talk about something that matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
And since veganism is my personality, I decided that I would talk about veganism. And then as I was kind of thinking, what am I going to call this? It just came to me, Did You Bring the Hummus? And that was inspired by a meme. It's like dinosaurs. There's three T-Rexes around a grill.
Mm-hmm.
And then the like brontosaurus, which I always thought, like, we know the brontosaurus never existed now, but like when I was a kid, that's what we called it. The brontosaurus comes in and he's in the corner and he looks very shy and he says, little bubble above his head says, I brought the hummus. Because we know that the brontosaurus was one of the vegetarian dinosaurs.
Right.
So I thought, isn't that fun? That's what I'm going to call it because we vegans can relate, right? If we're at a party where nobody planned anything for us, there's a good chance there'll be hummus, and we know we can eat that. So at the very least, we've got that. So hummus is like the staple. It's the ultimate like thing when you're not sure what you're going to eat, and it all just kind of fell together. And then I started doing it, and I experienced some pod fade, as they call it, because I wasn't really prepared. I had done a few episodes just on my own. My husband joined me for one.
Oh, fun.
And yeah, because he's vegan too, which is so cool.
That's
Um,
helpful. Mine's
yeah.
not. But
Oh,
it's okay. He's supportive. So.
good. I almost feel like when I tell someone that my husband's also vegan and that he went vegan after me, uh, that I almost feel like I'm like rubbing it in, like, ha, I got one. So my apologies for that.
That's okay. My husband will joke around. He's like, "You're not going to convert me."
It's funny. That's what JP used to say that too. Is we were friends before we got married,
Uh-huh.
and like before we even started dating, we were like best friends. Like we became fast friends at work, and he was like, "Yeah, that's really interesting, but like being vegetarian is not something I'm interested in." And I was like, "Yeah, okay," because I didn't think I was going to be dating him, so I didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
He asked me questions. I was honest about things, and then we started dating. And then, he went vegetarian for a little while. And he's like, I don't really think this is working for me. And then I went vegan and he went vegan like 3 years later. And he's
Oh, wow.
been so ever since. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. But anyway, so back to the podcast. Sorry to
Oh, that's
derail it
okay.
there. So I was thinking that I didn't know if I was going to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad that I did. And this is one of those moments where when we're feeling like we like this thing, but we don't know if we're going to keep doing it for whatever reason, just keep going. At least a little bit more because
Mm-hmm.
I started getting guests and I enjoyed that. And I was like, okay, I actually kind of like talking to people about this. And the more people I talk to, the more I realize I really love this storytelling in this kind of environment. I knew I loved storytelling because I'd been part of Toastmasters, and that was my favorite thing about it. But the podcast thing, it was, it's a lot of work. If you're producing your own episodes, which I do, it is a lot of work. It's a lot of time booking guests, finding guests, booking them, editing, all those things. But like I've gotten to talk to some amazing people. I saw that you had on Chef Adam Sobel from Cinnamon Snail, and
Mm-hmm.
I got to talk to him too. Like he was on my podcast last year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Oh gosh, he's so much fun.
He's
And
a lot of fun, and his food is so good. I had his
yeah.
his donuts. Oh, I used to be addicted to
Hmm.
his donuts.
Yep. People line around the block for those donuts.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like I interviewed Peter Singer. That was my final episode of season 4 that finished up in February of this year. And Peter Singer is a huge name in our movement. And to be able to sit down and all I had to do was ask him. I met him I had been at an event. He was a speaker. When he was done speaking, he was just hanging around. I walked up to him and I told him about the podcast, told him what I was doing, thanked him for his work because he'd been so inspirational to me, and just said, Hey, would you be on my podcast? And he said, yes.
That's so
And then he
cool.
was. Yeah.
I can relate to your story with like my channel because around 2018, it was like a year after I got my coaching certification. I was trying to figure out my direction. I knew I wanted to help people. And I went through so many interesting things in my life that I just couldn't figure out which way to focus in helping people. It's like you want to help everyone.
Yep.
But I wasn't sure what my niche was. And I felt like this calling of doing a YouTube channel where I interview people and also create other content, but interview a lot of people. And I was caught in my head. I could talk to a room full of people without a problem, but speaking on video just freaked me out. And
Mm.
then a coach challenged me when I was at a meetup. I was like at a networking event for coaches, and I shared what I wanted to do, and just told me to create a name and create just get it started. So I created a channel. At the time it was Conquer Your Chaos, and just put up something. And then I just froze and I didn't do anything with it. It was easy to create graphics and watch videos on how to do YouTube channels, and like that felt productive. But then when it actually got to the doing part, I just was like, oh, I ran out of the stuff I need to learn and put together. Now I could actually do this. And then I kind of froze up for a couple months.
Mhm.
And then in I think early 2020, I then just went up there and did stuff, and it was clunky and challenging, but I just put myself out there.
Yep.
And then I was quiet for a bit, and then I joined this group for coaches, and then I just found I had some coaches that I connected with who were willing to do some interviews, and then just some other people and then I found other people and I just did interviews, and then I was quiet for a bit. And I rebranded it to Confidently Be You, and then I did more interviews and some other content. And then I was just struggling again, and then my dad was in the hospital and he was sick, and then he had passed away at the end of 2022. So I just last year 2023 kind of went through this cocooning phase where I just had to like set my business aside to kind of process things, and then I realized that I was passionate about helping empower people to be more confident living a lifestyle that is in alignment for them, not people pleasing. I was very
Mhm.
passionate about that. And I was very passionate about being vegan. And then I was like, I could put the two together because I remember my challenges as someone who was an aspiring vegan and then being vegan, the challenges I faced of being different from everyone around me. And a lot of those challenges were in my head. Yes, people are going to make comments. People are going to say stuff that's annoying.
Mhm.
But I realized I survived. It wasn't the end of the world, right? The world didn't end. I
Right.
managed to be, and I realized I want to share the stories of other vegans and and business owners, people who have great resources and tools, and just again, just the power of hearing a story of how someone else went about and did something.
Yeah.
And so I can just relate to how you start something. You don't know how it's
Mhm.
going to be. And there's been so many times I've wanted to like give up on it
Yeah.
because it's hard.
Mhm.
But there's like something beyond me that's like pulling me along. And I'm so glad that I did because I get to talk to people like you. And I just, and it's just asking, right?
Yeah.
And asking without attachment. Sometimes people say no, sometimes people don't write you back, and sometimes
Mhm.
people surprise you and will be like, sure. So,
Yeah. I've really like settled into the idea that whether I'm asking somebody to be on the podcast, or whether I'm doing a class or a course, the people who say yes are the people who are meant to be there. And the
mm-hmm.
people who say no, it's not the right time for them. It's not the right
Yeah,
time for me. I'm
yeah.
not their person in that moment. And it took a long time to get there, but that really helps me not feel like rejected, or that I'm not doing good enough, because if I were better at this person would have said yes. That's the old Kimberly. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this Kimberly is like, that's all right. Somebody else will come and take that spot, and it'll be good, and it'll be exactly what my listeners need, exactly, who needed to be there in that moment.
I agree with you 100%. I've been starting to develop that mindset more over the past couple months. It takes time.
It does.
But yeah, more so over the past 2, 3 months, I've gotten to that place. But you just got to keep showing up and doing things. And I feel like this is just an important thing to talk about because whoever's listening to this right now, if there's something that you want to start doing
Mhm.
or but you just don't know where to start, just start. You don't know where it's going to go. It's been just a cool adventure talking to people I wouldn't have normally talked to or connected with. It's brought me some interesting opportunities. So you just have to start and show up
Yep.
and figure out the rest. And I think I know just another side thing with that too about what you said, your people.
Mhm.
The same thing is when whatever you're doing in life, whether it's a podcast, a YouTube channel, or just being yourself.
Mhm.
And if people want to drop out of your life or criticize you because you're making choices that feel good for you, then those are not your people.
Exactly.
And or those are people you need to distance yourself from or not hold on to, because when we hold on to people who aren't in alignment with us, who don't really serve us, I don't mean serving us in a selfish way, but just being around them, it just drags us down. when we and yeah, sometimes it can be scary being alone, but when you break away from those people, they're not taking that space. And energetically, you're going to attract the right people. You just got to keep showing up, because if you hold on to the wrong people, then you're not going to have space for the right people.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to throw that little PSA
I love it.
because I don't know, it just felt like it was an important thing. So, Kimberly, what do you love most about being vegan?
Oh, what a great question. I I love that so selfishly, I love that it really aligns. Like, I'm truly who I am. I spent so much of my life thinking I was kind and compassionate and in all ways. And then I
Mm-hmm.
realized, oh, here's this big spot where I'm missing being kind and compassionate. And so now I have it all in there. And that just to feel truly like yourself is such a gift that
Yeah.
so many people don't get to experience. So I'm super thankful for that. But I love the experience and the adventure that being vegan is. Exploring different foods. Like when I when I was pre-vegan,
Mm-hmm.
I ate like four things. And that was it. I was
Oh,
very
wow.
boring eater. Like I would eat cheeseburgers, turkey sandwiches, and like pasta covered in cheese and like cakes, and like I was way more a sweets person. So the variety there was much bigger. But as far as like meals go, and there were a couple things my mom would make, but I wasn't like going out to these restaurants and trying everything on the menu. I went to a restaurant, found something I liked, and then that was what I ordered every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started learning how to like vegetables as a vegetarian, and then since being vegan, I eat so many different cuisines and I have experienced so many different flavors and spices and just this like total pleasure with food in a completely different way. And I know that there are so many different things I can still try. And now I'm excited about food. I used to be obsessed with food, and now I'm excited about food because it's just there's so much of a variety, and it just really is it's way more fun to eat
Mm-hmm.
this way. So I love that, and I don't know, I just love the philosophy behind it. I have a degree in philosophy,
Oh,
and
cool.
so it's something that really has always interested me. And so the morals and the ethics behind it, I feel I love like exploring that, and it's just made me such a better person. I've always cared about others, but not the way I do now, and not on such a global scale. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I can. That is really good. You know, I being vegan made me a much better cook. I think there's a misconception that you're limited as a vegan. It opened up a whole new world for
Mhm.
me when I was trying to just find dairy-free recipes and all these vegan recipes came up and I'm like, "Whoa." Now I loved vegetables. I was a big vegetable person and so it was like really fun to like see all these different things you can make, desserts that were healthier than the regular kind. Yeah, you can have your vegan junk food and things,
Mhm.
but still having a cheesecake using tofu or a chocolate pie or mousse or something having some kind of veggie component. I mean, sweet potatoes make delicious brownies. I mean,
Mhm.
it's going to be better for you than, the other way of making it. And I just love that creativity and the flavor and the ability to eat healthier without feeling deprived. And because eating comfort food was a big survival thing, being an emotional eater was a big
Yep.
thing for me. And so just having food that tasted like comfort food that was a little bit better for me. So I discovered all these spices and herbs and just different types of cuisines I never even knew or would have thought to try.
Mhm.
And yeah, you get excited. I have an addiction to buying vegan cookbooks because
Yeah, I have a lot of them too.
me too. And now I try to get really intentional with them. Like, okay,
Mhm.
this one's got a little bit different things than the other stuff, but it's just so fun and exciting and just looking at all the possibilities. And then it's just so easy to create your own stuff. Like sometimes I like to go to the farmer's market and just buy some random vegetables and make my
Mhm.
own little concoction from it. It's just more fun, like you said.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to touch on too is just the alignment of being who you are. Like, I feel like we don't realize a lot of time we're operating, at least I could speak for myself. I was operating most of my life not being who I really was. I had to find who that person really was. And then once you find that person, it's just a magical feeling. And of other vegans that I've spoken to is we become more intentional. We become aware of other things
Yeah.
just with people and the world. And so there seems to be something when you're making these compassionate choices about eating animals, wearing animals, and abusing animals. When you make these compassionate choices of not supporting that industry, it's interesting how that plays out in our lives and creates this whole other awareness for us. So I could relate to everything that you just said. I have a question. I'm curious because you at one point you didn't like vegetables. So
Mhm.
what did you do to like vegetables and what are some tips that you have for anyone listening who cringes at the thought of eating vegetables?
So, how I started was understanding why vegetables were good for me
Mm-hmm.
while letting other people make them. So, because I also didn't know how to cook, so I kind of had these two things working against me. So, I would go out to restaurants and order, a vegetarian meal and order, extra vegetables just to kind of get feeling like, well, they work at a restaurant. They must know how to cook these things. And, sometimes that's true, sometimes that's not.
That is
But
true.
so I started exploring with other people making them for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to be like, okay, this is okay. I don't hate that so much. I'll try this and I'll try it again. And it was very much just my why was so strong. I did not want to be eating animal flesh anymore. So I knew I had to learn how to like food that I could
Mm-hmm.
eat. And so it just kind of, it started with things like I kind of liked broccoli cooked, never raw. Even still, I don't really love it raw. But but I kind of liked broccoli. I would eat peas every once in a while. Spinach, I was like really grossed out by. My mom used to make it. My mom's a better cook now too, since she went vegan, but she wasn't a bad cook back when I was a kid, but
Mm-hmm.
she was, she had time constraints. And so sometimes she would make frozen spinach and
Oh
it
yeah.
was like always so watery. And I hated it so much. I can still see it on my plate. And I was like, I'm never going to eat spinach. So with that one, I started with raw spinach because it was so different from what I had experienced as a kid. And so it worked out where I was like, okay, I can eat this. And I just slowly built things from there. I mean, I say I hated vegetables, but when I was eating those turkey sandwiches, they had lettuce, tomato, and onions on them. So I knew I liked that. But
Hmm.
as far as like eating a big plate of vegetables, stir fry loaded with vegetables, fajitas with vegetables, I was not really into that. So but I knew I liked those flavors. So that was the other thing. It was like trying to incorporate the vegetables into what I would have had as a meat dish. And so it's trial and error and just be open. That's the
Hmm.
most important thing. You know your why, you have that strong why. You're not going to go back on that. And you just have to be open and it really is fun. And that's a good way to look at it. Like, don't go into it like, oh my God, I have to eat vegetables now. You really need to go into it like, this is an adventure. I'm going to learn so much about myself and about food. And it's a good time.
Those are great tips. Yeah, it's important to experiment and have fun. And what I realized too after going vegan is a lot of it is not actually about the meat. It's about the sauce or the spices
Mhm.
that you put on it.
Yep.
So it's all about how you season it up and and just put things on and I put hummus on a million things. Like it's great on pasta, baked potatoes, vegetable
Mhm.
burgers, you know,
Yep.
everything. So and like I've used it as like a cream sauce on pasta.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
plop that on and put some extra garlic and nutritionally and other things. And so you see so much possibility and it's also made me better getting creative with like leftovers. Like when I make soup, if I have like leftover vegetables, it's like, oh, let me just throw together a concoction with, with what I have left over here. So yeah, those are really great tips. So if anyone's listening who's feeling challenged with vegetables, just experiment and try. And that was smart to try. You know, first have other people make it for you, and then,
Yeah.
and then because change takes time. Like you can't just we want the end result like now, like yesterday, but it it
Yeah.
doesn't happen that way. We have to just one step at a time, one meal at a time. That's the key is just doing little incremental changes until all of a sudden you've made the complete shift over. Um,
Hmm.
what are some challenges that you still face being vegan?
Um, hmm. I would say that those are probably a lot more of protecting my emotions
Mm-hmm.
because I'm at the point where everyone who's in my life knows who I am, what I'm about, and they're not arguing with me anymore. I don't have family members or friends who, make comments. So like I'm out of that completely, which is really nice.
Lucky you.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a good thing.
It's a great thing. It really is. And I hope for every vegan that they reach that point because that doesn't mean that everyone in my life is vegan. It's just me, my husband, and my mom. Um,
Hmm.
but everybody else who's friends and family and stuff, they are not. So I've stood my ground enough times where they kind of have given up. So what I really struggle with a lot is the emotional piece, knowing
Hmm.
that even though I'm not contributing to the intense cruelty that's out there in the animal agriculture system, it's still happening.
Yeah.
And I have to be very mindful of being on social media. I follow tons of different vegan groups and animal rights activists, which is great, but also can be very painful because, they're sharing the things that the people who need to see it. And I'm not one of those people.
Yeah.
And so I have this it's really a lot of back and forth with I want to bear witness because I have such respect for these animals. But at the same time, if I bear witness every single time, there'll be nothing left of me to be the activist I am and to
Hmm.
show up in a way that helps people start to see veganism as an option for themselves. And
Yeah.
so it's like kind of weighing that. That's my biggest challenge.
Yeah, it is challenging. I've run into that too with certain people who I follow, and their work's important, but it's also, again, I already know. I'm
Hmm.
already a believer in this. And it's important that they do share these things, but it breaks my heart because then I start thinking about the poor animals in the picture
Hmm.
and the fear that they're facing, and then it just, it can be really, really hard. So that definitely, it you become more empathic to, I feel like, as a vegan, to the animals, because you no longer have that disconnect
Right.
to it. And it's, the last thing that I recently changed, because I was the cook in the house. So the way that I was able to change being vegan, what helped me is I was willing at the time to still make non-vegan food for my family, but I wouldn't make it for myself. And by me being vegan, it reduced a lot of the animal stuff. Everyone realized milk made them feel crappy anyway. So
Yeah.
it's interesting how that happened. So everyone happily went on almond milk or
Hmm.
whatever, but usually we get almond milk. So that was easy. But, and just still having animal products, and I was still making it. And then eventually we became empty nesters. It was just me and my husband, and I really don't like cooking meat, touching it. And I told my husband like a couple months ago, he doesn't really do cooking. Like he does a little bit on basic, but I was like, I'll show you what to do. But I just can't do this anymore because I just thought, I was just thinking too much about it. And he has been respectful of that, and I showed him what to do, and moved on. And I'm sharing this story because I share my various, aspects of my journey, because I want other people who are listening, who live with non-vegans, who might not know what to do. Do whatever you need to do to adjust. It's okay if if you, and it just shows that transition. We're always like changing and adjusting. I've spoken to other vegans who eventually modify other things where they can't even eat at a non-vegan restaurant or eat around non-vegans. I feel like as time goes on, we 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 need to set a new boundary as we evolve with this vegan process. And so whatever that is, you just start, do whatever you need to do to get started. And then,
Yep.
because the key is you need to honor yourself and honor your truth, and just sharing those boundaries. And I think for me, the social thing has gone better. It's, for me, it's about community. Like, I created a community, the Vegan Sip and Chat, and just speaking to finding other vegan communities to talk to. It's so important to have that community, aspect, especially when you don't have that. But yeah, I still get the comments like, that's not real protein, and
Uh,
or hypotheticals, all kinds of hypotheticals. And
hmm.
you know what? I don't take I try to address all these things with humor.
Hmm.
Because if you don't have a sense of humor with it, it can really drive you crazy. And so, like, that helps me. And then I set the whatever necessary boundary I need to set, and then move on.
Yeah,
It's a muscle. It takes time.
it does.
But yeah, I can relate so much on what you shared about just the feelings you get. That's definitely a challenge as a vegan, because when you see these things, it's very sad, for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, what are some ways that vegans and non-vegans can be more inclusive of one another? What are some tips that you could share on that? since that is a big issue a lot of people
Yeah.
do go through. Like, what are some tips that have worked for you?
So I think being honest from the vegan perspective, when people ask you questions, to not
Mm-hmm.
shy away from sharing the hard stuff, but to also not be the vegan that's like in everybody's face while they're eating something, making them feel badly about it, or pointing out what it is that they're eating in the moment, I feel is not a great time for that. I
Mm-hmm.
I gave a speech not too long ago at Toastmasters where I talked about the vegan hospitality consulting that I do, and I talked about this thing called the vegan veto. And after the speech was over, no one else in the club is vegetarian or vegan, and so many of them were like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize this," and I'll tell you what that is in a second. The one person even said, I have a couple of vegan friends, and I've never once thought about whether or not they're enjoying when we go out to eat and all they have is French fries and a dry salad. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like, well, you should be a better friend, but also, yeah, we're kind of like conditioned almost that like, well, we're going to a regular restaurant, and if you can't eat here, that's your problem. But it really isn't our problem. We should be able to eat where everybody else eats. And so that's one of the things I'm working on through the vegan hospitality consulting is getting people in restaurants, owners and chefs and stuff to understand like, hey, you're actually not losing out by including vegan options. And the vegan veto is a big part of that because what that is that if we're in a group of friends and we're going out to eat and I'm the only vegan and everybody else is like, hey, let's go to this restaurant that everybody loves, but they don't have a single vegan option. If I say, I can't eat there, I would like to go to this restaurant instead where I can eat. If my friends care about me, they're going to say, yeah, of course, we'll go to this other place. And
Mm-hmm.
then that place that initially was going to get that party of 6 or 7 people has now lost out on not just the vegan person, but the non-vegans who are with them. And the place that can accommodate a vegan, that's where everybody is going. The group that has the vegan is showing up at the places that have these options. So that I think is a significant way that we can be more inclusive, where we vegans are not giving the meat eaters a hard time while they're eating things that we wish they weren't eating, people, beings that we wish they weren't eating. And then they are finding ways to be inclusive of us, thinking about the fact like, hey, we're going out to eat. Jen can't eat here, we can't go here. We don't want to go here because we want Jen to be able to be comfortable and have a good time too. So I think that is as food is such a big part of culture and experience,
Yeah.
the way we spend time together. And so that's why that's my focus. When you ask me that question, it's the first thing I think of because I think finding ways to be together around food is really significant. And I think it will open up a lot of people's eyes when they realize that we vegans aren't eating weird things. We're eating very normal food, and it just hasn't come from someone who had an interest in living. That's the big difference.
I love that. That's great, the vegan veto, and I love how you illustrated how both sides can be respectful of the other.
Yeah.
And you're right. Being in someone's face isn't going to force somebody to change their their
Yeah.
mind on something. If anything, you're just going to get more defensive. But just being an example, when I go to someone's house, I'll usually bring like a main dish and some dessert. And then
Mhm.
it's an opportunity, and everyone who's always trying is like, oh, this is vegan, right? And so I look at those moments as an opportunity to say, hey, vegan food's yummy, right? So something doesn't have to die to enjoy food, but I do it without saying that by just
Yep.
bringing food. And yeah, and I feel like communication is so important. Yeah, it's interesting how there's more restaurants that are having vegan options, but then there are some that I've been to some places where it's like all the salad options have like meat or cheese
Mhm. Yep.
all over it. And then I have to like ask them to modify it. Like, can't you just have like one salad? Because I'm like, well, can I have double cucumbers instead of this? And like, since I'm not having meat, can I just have an avocado?
Then
Like,
there's
why
an
not?
extra charge for the
Right,
avocado.
of course.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm not having the meat. So,
Hmm.
yeah, and we went to a newish place in our area a few months ago where it was like we went there and the menu on the website had one salad that I could have had. It's like some harvest salad, but
Hmm.
apparently it was seasonal. And when we got there, it was no longer on the menu, and they had nothing else that was vegan.
Oh,
Nothing. It was like some overly salty fries that were the only option. So luckily, my our friends that we were with, they were like, we'll just have like a drink here, and then we found another place in an area where we could then get lunch, and then I would be able to eat something also. So my friends, thankfully, have been very supportive, and my family, they've been pretty supportive of it. But that's an example of how a restaurant lost business, right? We
yeah.
could have been there longer.
Hmm.
But it was like, oh, there's nothing here to eat. Well,
Yeah.
we'll just have a drink and then we'll go give more money someplace else. And so
Hmm.
it can't hurt a restaurant to have a few decent vegan options. I went to a place with a friend before a concert a month ago, and they had the wood fire pizzas, and they had a make your own personal pizza, and they had vegan cheese.
Nice.
So it was great. Like usually I've done a make my own pizza and there's no cheese on it, but
Hmm.
they had that option and it was really great. And it's so there's just simple little things that restaurants can do. So I think that's really important work that you're doing because it benefits the business and it just makes things easier for everyone all around.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, it's been so great having you on here.
Yeah, thank
I feel like we
you.
could talk forever on different things, and
Good.
it's just really great, yeah, having you share your perspective and insight. Um, Before we wrap up, I always ask my guests, what are some inspirational resources you would like to share?
Well, certainly Peter Singer's Animal Liberation Now. That's the latest version that came out last year. So, from an animal rights perspective, understanding not just the food part, the animals that are turned into food, that's the second half of the book. First half of the book is all about vivisection, animal testing.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
a really good dive into the ethics behind why we go vegan. So that's one of my top recommendations. As far as inspiration in the kitchen, I love all things Isa Chandra Moskowitz. So she owns restaurants in Omaha, Nebraska, and Brooklyn, New York. And then
Mm-hmm.
Modern Love, I think
Oh,
it's called.
I've heard of Modern Life. I used to
Yeah.
live in Brooklyn. I've heard of it.
Okay. Issa is my
Mm.
favorite vegan chef. And followed by Nisha Melvani, who her blog and Instagram is Cooking for Peanuts. And so
Oh,
she's a registered dietitian. And so her dishes are healthy, they are budget friendly, and they are really, really good. She has a sticky tofu recipe that I make all the time, and it is delicious.
I will have to check that out.
Yeah. But I have purchased every one of Issa's cookbooks as they come out, even though I don't need any more cookbooks. She puts one out and I am there online to get one because the way that some of her stuff is a little advanced too, but the way that she puts together a cookbook, the descriptions in the beginning to get you comfortable. One of her cookbooks even talks about knife skills. Nisha's cookbook does the same thing. So there's a lot of ways to learn too, just within those. So I think those are my top three inspirational resources.
Awesome. I'll include the links in the notes below for everyone watching to check those out. Those sound great. I'll have to check those out myself. They sound good. I don't need more cookbooks, but if she's that good,
She is, and they're in the library too. If you want to, test them out before you make a
I'm just
purchase.
going to probably buy my own. I like to look at the pictures too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's something relaxing about that.
There is.
Kimberly, it was so great having you on here. What is the best way for people to connect with you?
The best way to connect with me is on my website. That's where you'll find all the things. And the website is didyoubringthehummus.com. There's a contact form so you can get in touch with me if you have questions or anything. If you're a vegan and you want to be on the podcast, there's a link to sign up to be a guest. My blogs are there. The podcasts are there. You can find the podcast also on Apple and Spotify and everywhere that podcasts are. So yeah, that's the best way to get me. Hit me up on my website.
Awesome. All right. Well, I recommend everyone check out Kimberly's website, check out her podcast. And thanks for watching. Thanks again, Kimberly, for coming on here. And I will see you all soon. Take care. Bye for now.